Okay, we'll get started now. Welcome to the December from the Kislak Stacks presentation. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Lynn Farrington, Director of Programs and a Senior Curator here in the Kislak Center. Before I introduce today's speaker, I would like to mention that while this is the last of the from the Kislak Stacks presentations for the fall of 2025, we have a great lineup for the spring semester, beginning with our colleague Alicia Meyer, who will present on the artist Wanda Gog, whom you might know best as the author and illustrator of children's books like Millions of Cats and the ABC Bunny. Alicia has been exploring Gog's archive here at Penn, and on January 23rd, she will speak about Gog's political work in a presentation she's titled C is for Collective, the Political Work of Wanda Gog. Please join us for this and the rest of the spring presentations. Now to today's speaker. Susan Molofsky Todres is an alumna of the University of Pennsylvania, holding a BA from 1975 from the College of Liberal Arts for Women, now the School of Arts and Sciences, and an MBA from 1977 from the Wharton School. Susan's corporate career focused on both consumer and institutional product marketing at Gillette, Johnson & Johnson, and Sterling Drug, Kodak, Sanofi, where she was director of marketing. As a Penn alum, Susan has served as marketing chair on the board of advisors for the School of Social Policy and Practice. She is a longstanding member of the Trustees Council of Penn Women and co-chaired its Advancement of Women Faculty Committee. Her participation on the executive board of the celebration of 125 years of women at Penn in 2001, I remember that, led to a keen interest in Penn history and the memorabilia associated with it. She began actively searching for and donating items of interest, both whimsical and scholarly, to the university archives in 2002 and continues to volunteer in that role. Susan was honored with the Penn's Alumni Award of Merit in 2010. Her talk today will focus on her interest in Penn history and its relationship to memorabilia in a presentation she's titled Collecting Penn Memorabilia for the University Archives. I'm going to turn it over to Susan. Thank you.
Lynn, thank you so much. And thank you to all of you who have given up lunch dates externally. I really appreciate your time and your interest in what has become such a great passion for me over the last nearly 25 years. Next. I wanted to start out by thanking not only those of you that have chosen to join, but also those of you who have been so extremely supportive of me and of my work. First off has got to be Mark Fraser Lloyd, Director Emeritus of Penn Archives. Mark and I first met when we were collaborating over 125 years of women at Penn, and Lynn, I'm so glad you remember that. We worked together on trying to examine different aspects of women's first accomplishments at Penn. And when we were through with that, I took an interest in the many things that were out there in a memorabilia sphere that apparently the archives did not have and had not understandably devoted its funding to. Jim Duffin has been extraordinary, also in his support and help with my adventures and ventures, and I thank him deeply. The late Mary McConaughey did a superb job of photographing and scanning so many of the items that I have been fortunate to find. And John Bentz, thank you to you for welcoming me on board with your administration and your collaboration. I really appreciate it. Lynn, super thanks to you for honoring me with this opportunity. I love what I do. I love what I've been able to find, and especially love being able to pull it out from the boxes where they hide. And John, to you as well, for helping with the production on this, which is not my forte in any way, shape, or form. Mitch Frass, who I know is not able to be with us at this moment, has been a wonderful collaborator, and I'll get a phone call or most likely an email and say, hey, I met this seller and he's got something that I think you might be interested in. And I try to reciprocate when I can, though his sphere is much, much greater than mine. But Mitch has been wonderful, and I really appreciate his assistance and help. There are also thanks due to J. Ahern and Alyssa Hogan. I understand she's crossed over to the library, but she was also very helpful in photographing materials that I would bring in after Mary was no longer with us, and also to Tim Horning. There's a wonderful staff at Archives, and I am just deeply appreciative to all of you, both there as well as the library, for helping me, because I'm, in the end, just an alum who has an interest in deepening people's knowledge of what came before us and understanding the power of Penn and understanding what Penn stood for and stands for. Next. I chose to name this slide 125 years, and on it you'll just see displayed to the left a wonderful lithograph, which the artist Earl Christy did approximately 1900. For those of you that are familiar with his work, this will look very familiar. I've been able to acquire several of them, and so I'm going to acknowledge that I always think of Archives first, and then if I see a duplicate of something that I really love, and I do love this one, I try to find a place for it. They all came framed originally in a black frame, not particularly attractive, and this is quintessential hurrah girl, quintessential Penn memorabilia, emblematic of Penn memorabilia around 1900. Also, and I chose these two items as representative of much of what you're going to see. The flag to the left is actually a pennant pin. This one in particular is about 1.5 inches by 1.5 inches. It's sterling silver, and the red may not be so obvious. It has a guilloche enamel effect to it. It was produced, as many of the fine pennant pins were, by E Caldwell, who did produce for Penn. I'm not aware of them producing for other universities, but I am also going to say that I am not an expert on other universities' pennant pins. These were worn as symbols of tremendous pride and enthusiasm. The Christy girl holding the banner is also emblematic, both of these, emblematic of what was essentially the rise of intercollegiate sports, and specifically intercollegiate football. And this seemed to have bubbled up from about 1885 to maybe 1925 in terms of the most active production of materials that people like to collect and are interested in. They certainly differ from what you would find, I think, if you walked into the Penn bookstore today, where there are lots of stuffed animals and sweatshirts and T-shirts, but I don't think anybody's buying sterling silver pennant pins or lithographs. Next. Earl Christy, who I just introduced you to with the slide before, is the most prolific and well-known of the people that captured this time and era. Most students today are dressed in blue jeans and leggings, but that was not the case in this time frame. I thought it was interesting to look at all of the representations. He did a variety of materials. The one on the left is a postcard. It's a football player, obviously having a fun time flirting. The woman below is one of my most favorite images. It is also a postcard. And I have strived hard to find those that have been unused, the ones, and I've run across many of them that were postally used and marked, and so the condition of them is not as great, but the notes of affection are wonderful on the back sides of them. And I believe this woman in the bottom left corner is emblematic of this time and this arena that occurred in the midst of a great explosion of developing relationships with and competing against other schools. You'll see in the center, and it may not be so easy to read, but you'll see representations of what I call Christy girls from other universities, Stanford, Harvard. I'm having trouble reading, Cornell, and the bottom left is a Penn girl. The representation on the right is actually a pillowcase cover. And so, yes, it's a little bit soiled, of a couple sitting on top of a football. And another iconic Christy image is football player. He did these for many schools, obviously a football mug. That image of the football player appears on all sorts of materials, including postcards. Next. I became aware that Kislak had an exhibition on this wonderful report that was done by the Philomathian Society. They were the very first to do the translation of the Rosetta Stone into English, which by 3 undergraduates in 1858. There are a number of copies of the book. There were 2 editions that I'm aware of. They're chromolithographed in the most spectacular way. And for those of you that did get to see the library exhibit, you saw the treat that it is. We have several copies over at Archives. The 3 undergraduates that were responsible for having produced this were Henry Morton, Charles R. Hale, and a gentleman, S. Huntington Jones. It is hard to imagine that 3 undergraduate kids undertook this enterprise, but they did, and it was recognized, and today still recognized around the world as a tremendous academic achievement. The Philomathian Society, which is the oldest student literary society, continues its work today and has much to be proud of in its history. The next 2 items on this slide are productions that were posters of productions that were mounted by the Architectural Society. And the Architectural Society was literally a group of undergraduate students who enjoyed putting on plays. And so you'll see the posters for each of these. I don't believe that this continues, or I'm not aware that it continues today. But again, it was sort of arts display, not dissimilar to what I think you'll see on the next slide, Jim, which is, of course, the Mask and Wig Club, which continues in existence and each year delights us with their comedy and their energy and their wonderful productions. I thought these three examples were particularly interesting because one was actually a printed invitation to I believe, a smoker, and it was a production that Mask and Wig Club did. Clearly, they started their work in 1879, as the poster shows the decennial anniversary. There is a lot of imagery and references to lots of fun things within the posters that you're seeing. This particular one was featuring a play that they called The Dreyfus Detailed. There's lots of fun instruction about what to do or not do when the theater goes dark. And I feel very fortunate to have found these items. They were also unusual to me, Jim, I'm sorry. They were unusual to me because they were honoring the Penn football team. And that team of 1899 had, I researched this, 8 wins, 3 losses, 2 ties. They were not national champions. They were not at that time engaged in a conference of any sort. And I think that in that year, there's some disagreement about whether Harvard or Princeton were the actual winners in that Ivy League conference. But Mask and Wig was honoring football, as was, I feel, so much of the enthusiasm that spills over in many of the things that we're viewing. Thanks, Jim. In 1929, there were a set of 12 Wedgwood plates which were produced. I've selected 4 of them to share with you and talk about a little bit. In the upper left-hand corner, you'll see what was then known as the Town School of Engineering. The quad is featured, first one down on the left. Adjacent to that, which may be perhaps easiest to recognize, is the University Museum. And up at the top may also look familiar, it's Houston Hall. What may not be as easy to notice is that these plates are actually very complex. They feature up at the top some extra details. The first is the original University of Pennsylvania campus, which was at 4th and Arch Streets. On the sides, you'll see the 2 buildings that represented the second university campus, which was at 9th and Chestnut. And you will see at the bottom the university's seal, which reappears on many images throughout time. It was changed in 1933 to more or less what it looks like today. But what is consistent about the seal is, and I do not want to botch up the Latin, so I'm going to use the English and simply say that that it translates to knowledge without morals. Sorry, laws without morals are useless. I'm going to repeat that. Laws without morals are useless. And I'm not going to make any political commentary. I think this particular set of plates are fantastic. Who would use them, how they would use them. Again, a symbol of Penn pride. About 5 years later, there were a set of cups and saucers which were produced. They're harder to find. I think I've found 5 or 6 of them over time, and they are within the holdings at archives. Jim? In 1940, actually, these were first produced in 1939, but they call them 1940. Also, a set of Wedgwood plates commemorating the university's bicentennial. The one on the left, maybe, I hope, familiar to many of you. It was designed by R. Tate McKenzie, and it stands, I believe, still today in front of what was called Waitman Hall. It was donated by the class of 1904 in honor of their 10th anniversary. And each plate, as is the case with the 1929 set, features different views of the university. The one to the right I believe is the law school. Other renderings included dormitory steps, the spire at Irvine Auditorium. What was also really fun about this particular set was that different people, alums as well as staff members, were invited to design what they wanted to do as renderings. And so you see a set of demitasse cups, in this case, celebrating homecoming. And on the bottom of each of them is the attribution to the person who designed it. I tried to research the Boston reference there. I'm not familiar with that company. So I should also point out that while I have keen interest in Penn history and have learned, I'd like to think, just a fraction of what there is to know, in fact, I'm not a historian, and my role is generally one of acquisition. So I might be pretty good at being able to know if something is authentic, and pretty good about knowing whether it's in the collections or might be of interest to somebody like John Bentz, because I always have to have approval from the archivist or assistant archivist before I donate something. I've been told no on a few occasions, and those are things that maybe I've bought and tucked away for somebody that'll say yes sometime. Next. Silver spoons were also a very popular form of expressing pride, not only at Penn, but at other schools as well. I included ones of both a female and a male. The one on the colored version on the right is actually the tip of the spoon is a portrait of a provost named Charles Curtis Harrison. The spoon itself probably dates to 1900. Provost Harrison served in that role from 1894 to 1911. He was an extremely important figure on the Board of Trustees for over 50 years. He was amazingly prolific in his contacts and his fundraising abilities. And I've read varying numbers of how many buildings he was actually responsible for seeing built or finding the funding to have built. And this spoon was obviously done in tribute to him, and also a beautiful picture of College Hall. The spoon below is rendered out of walnut. It was carved by a gentleman named Daniel Pabst. He did a number of these sorts of spoons for University of Pennsylvania. It represents a senior honor award. Each year, an award was given in the form of either a cane, a bowl, or a spoon. I've been fortunate to find several of the Pabst spoons. This one, they're all similarly elaborate, but also differing in their designs. This one features a carved owl and a leaf figure. It is from 1883, and it was awarded to Charles W. Burr, B-U-R-R. It's about 22.5 inches long and 3 3/4 inches wide. They're fantastic. They're just fantastic, and I get so excited every time I stumble on one. It too, along the top of the carving, bears the Latin. I'm going to goof it up, but Sine Moribus Vane. Somebody want to chime in and correct me? I'm happy to hear it. But again, the laws without morals are meaningless. Next, I thought it would be interesting to just see personal accessories that were common at this time. That's a military style hairbrush from 1896. It says SB Junior left end on it. One of the helpful people at Archives was able to trace this to belong to a gentleman named S.A. Boyle, who was class of 98, 1898, and he was a member of the law school, or graduated the law school. The second image is a women's compact in sterling silver with, again, university design. These were very commonly used and probably put into this homemade pouch that you see on the right. I don't think this made it into the Penn bookstore, but there were many handicrafts that were made to express Penn pride. Also, probably in this velvet pouch, you would have found a dance card. These are pieces from another era. I don't think that pouch would have accommodated probably, actually, I'm going to correct myself, probably would have accommodated a cell phone. I just got very excited when I found this piece with the P for Penn and the pennant on it. Next. Football, and more football, and always celebrated with a beautiful cover on a program for the football game of the day. In this case, I chose randomly games that were played against Columbia, Navy, Dartmouth. This is crazy. I'm having a view problem. Bear with me 1 second.
It's Virginia.
Thank you. And I chose that because, for those of you that don't know me, I grew up in Norfolk, Virginia. And I also thought it was interesting that we were playing and competing against not only Ivy League schools, but other schools, and certainly Lehigh and a whole host of other places were competed against in later years. These programs are not obviously as old as a lot of the material that I'm showing you, but I believe that the university archives has a complete run of these. Should you be interested, the amount of work that went into the art on this is pretty extraordinary. Next, I chose a Cornell cover specifically because I wanted to highlight an old tradition that has disappeared, and that was that Penn always played Cornell on Thanksgiving Day. And so what you see to the left are broadsides that I was fortunate to find, which talk to the train that used to come from Ithaca to Philadelphia on Thanksgiving Day to escort the Cornellians to compete against us. And they're also, obviously, they had a rally preceding that particular event that year, 1910. There was, at some point, rebellion from Cornell, and who felt that we ought to alternate years. And of course, that occurred, I think, for a few years, and then the tradition disappeared, I suspect largely because parents wanted their children home for Thanksgiving. And not everybody was in Philadelphia anymore or living in the Philadelphia area. But that was a wonderful and storied tradition. And there are many Cornell, Pennsylvania Thanksgiving Day game Franklin Field Illustrated covers. They could constitute a lecture unto themselves. Thank you. Jim? There were other sports that were played other than football. Big shock. The gentleman standing on the left holding a baseball bat was a dental student who graduated Penn Dental School in 1896. It may come as a huge surprise to you to know that it is actually a cabinet card photograph of one Pearl Zane Grey, otherwise known as Zane Grey, well-known author. He was the writer of Riders of the Purple Sage. And yes, graduate students played with undergraduate students on their teams. And he was apparently well known as a pitcher and as a fairly prolific hitter as well. The other two that I've included are silks. These are associated with tobacco. Generally speaking, these were premiums that you collected. There are an infinite number of them. I chose another baseball and a track. They were produced by different cigarette companies, and you would have a certain number of tickets that came in your cigarette package, and you could exchange them once you'd amassed enough, and would be rewarded with a silk. Jim? Pennant pins. I like the way that Jim has spelled this. I don't know if I stand up enough, you can see that I'm wearing a pin that is sterling and enamel. That is quite a bit different than these. My very first purchase was a pennant pin for university archives, and I've lost count of how many I have found over the years. The very elaborate sterling pins, the most elaborate sterling pins, were from E Caldwell. But they were also produced by a company that you'll see on the back of a pin. It will say CMR, and that would stand for Charles M. Robbins. They were a producer in New York, and they produced for many, many universities. I thought it would be different, just interesting for you to see the various pins that are available or were available. The one in the bottom left corner is quite small. The one in the center is actually about 3.5 inches wide and was designed for men to wear on their overcoats. This was obviously at a time before there were ski jackets. The one to the right, upper right corner, I think is very common. It had huge mass production and is probably the most easy of them to find. These are, the gold is not gold, it's copper and it's been gilded. The enamel is actually poured around a plate. The letters are raised, so if you have the opportunity to see one of these or touch one of these and you run your finger across it, you can feel the actual lettering. I learned all of this courtesy of an enamelist that I met in New York who helped with the repair of a special one that had a little bit of a chip on it. And he showed me by lifting up the enamel, you'll notice that the red and blue, there's always a separation. And that is how they were able to do the pouring of the enamel. The red is usually a guilloche, which is a pattern design designed to give a little more sparkle and pizzazz to the pin. The pin in the bottom right corner was produced obviously for the class of 1903. I do not have any information as to who the actual designer was or whether it was produced for the graduation or it was a reunion, which is more what I suspect. I love these pins, and I'm always looking for something new and different. But they certainly are not exclusive to Penn. You will see renderings of them for all of this, for many, many schools. I always feel great Penn pride, as I'm sure the wearers did, when I wear mine. And typically, I can't think of a meeting at Penn or an event at Penn where I haven't worn one that's in my own collection. Jim? I wanted to share some images of Ben Franklin, and I will be the first to tell you that I did not purchase that particular version at the far right corner of Benjamin Franklin. I do have a sculpture that is a miniature of this that is intended for university archives when I'm finished admiring it. And so that's the reason I included it. I thought it was important to share the founder of our university's the images of him as they've evolved over time. The somewhat bent version up at the left corner is bronze. It's referred to as a medallion. It was produced by a gentleman named Jean-Baptiste Nini, excuse my French, and I think it symbolizes Benjamin Franklin when he was ambassador to France for a number of years. This is the very oldest piece that I think I have acquired for archives. It dates to 1780. It was also produced in well, it's referred to as clay, but it was actually terracotta. And University Archives is fortunate to have a version in terracotta as well. Those break easily, and so not too many of those have survived. The bronze are I would not say you would stumble into your average antique store and find it, but they have been findable over the years. You're also looking at a portrait of Franklin at the bottom left. It's a miniature. It's in red velvet. It's actually in a case with silk edging. It's about 3.5 inches or so in size. It's hand painted transfer print. I stumbled across it at an ephemera society show and purchased it. I thought it was great fun to show Red Groom's rendering to poster that of his that I was able to find. There was an exhibit of Red Groom's work at the Institute of Contemporary Art. I believe it's 1976 exhibit. I'm not going to swear to that. And I thought it showed a much more humorous and jovial side of Franklin, which I do believe from everything I've ever read existed. And I think as time has emerged, this particular sculpture to the right, which we are all familiar with as Ben on a Bench, is sort of an evolution of how we look at Franklin and feel about him in a paternal sort of way. I want to offer extra thanks and did not include them in the beginning, but I understand that Jordan Rothschild and Michael Overgaard at the library helped with the rescanning of the Red Groom's poster, and my appreciation for that, because what we had was not anywhere near as fine as this. Last but not least, Jim Duffin. You can ask me questions. I am not going to guarantee you that I have answers. We chose, and I will say this was a collaborative effort with Jim, 2 figures that have disappeared from my screen. One is a pillowcase. We do not have any information on it. It's a colored lithograph. It's about 10 by 10, showing a little girl. And it, in very fine letters, is inscribed "Touchdown for Pennsylvania." I think that probably might have been sold at the Penn bookstore in those days. To the right is my friend Humpty Dumpty, who is Jim Duffin's favorite. He squeaks if you squeeze him. I have encouraged others who have handled him not to squeeze him too hard. You'll see the representation U of P on him. And that's interesting to me because I think today we refer to Penn as UPenn or Penn. It was often referred to as U of P over the ages. This particular gentleman, Jim was astonished to hear, had visited what was then the New York Doll Hospital for some repair because I found him not in mint condition. But I think that they symbolize youthfulness, desire to include the youth in our families, desire for young people to embrace Penn, and to grow up knowing the red and blue, and to know a little bit about its history. And I thank you very much for your time. Robin Simon, hi. I don't know about snow globes. I'm not familiar with them. They may well exist. I don't profess to know. You could spend, you know, I've spent nearly 25 years and there's always something new to see. So I don't, I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with
Right.
snow
I'll
globes.
have to look because I have a big collection of snow globes, but
Oh, I'd love to know about it.
other schools have issued them like as gifts for donations kind of thing, but it's more recent. So,
You know, I had chosen sort of 125 years, which was not really accurate given the Nini bronze rendering of Franklin, but by and large, most of my acquisitions fell within the beginning of the 20th century, 1900s, maybe late 1880s, and then maybe to 1920, 1930.
Hi, Susan. This is Lynn. It looks like Randon Jarris's question for you. Have you looked for sheet music from the late 19th century and early 20th century? Because he's seen many of these from many colleges, often with beautiful color illustrations.
Hi, Rand. Yes, and I have acquired a number of pieces of sheet music. Um, I was given a certain amount of time.
yeah.
And so I did not everything, and I really I think that maybe at this point I've contributed over 1,000 items, and so there were certain categories that I did not include, but certainly sheet music is part of the collections. Yes.
And Jackie Einstein Astroff asks, can you tell us more about your process, how you go about searching for specific items or how you come across the findings?
Now you're asking me to give my secrets away? Yeah, no. Um, I will say this, the world of online has been a tremendous facilitator to me, and the Ephemera Society of America has helped introduce me to a number of dealers. And as I do business with people, I always emphasize to them, it always seems to be sometimes if I'm competing with others to make an acquisition, they're always very proud that what I'm buying is being donated to Penn. And I'm sidestepping most of your question, Jackie. But I will say that I'm proud to have developed a relationship with a lot of dealers over the years who definitely have my email and my phone number and think of me, and more importantly, think of Penn, and will give me a call when they find something of interest that they think the university might want to have.
Susan,
I go to shows. I do go to shows, not as frequently as folks from the library. Certainly not as frequently as Mitch Frass, who I know was at the book fair in Philadelphia last night. I would say that a lot of my work has really been virtual, ending up being virtual introductions.
Susan, this might be a great opportunity to encourage other people who have found things that might
Yes.
not be at the university archives to, think about, presenting them to the archives to join the collection, because I'm sure, I know you've got you're out there, but other people may see things or have things in their own collection or know other people who have things. So it's a great chance to encourage people to think about what they might have that might be of, that we might not already have in the archives.
I would welcome, I know I should not say I know. There's always selectivity, particularly about condition and duplication, but I will say this. Some of the best finds that I have made and discoveries that I've made were not featured today. One of them is a glass lantern slide collection from a medical school class of 1884 or 1889. I'm blanking at the moment. Most of these things very often are found in the backwoods of Pennsylvania, because Penn initially was heavily populated by people from the Philadelphia area, from the state of Pennsylvania, from New Jersey, from Delaware, and so forth. And so those are where still undiscovered great finds are. And if you are in touch with people that have things, I'm sure John Bentz would love to hear from you, or Jim Duffin would love to hear from you. Yes.
Susan, Sean Quimby asked, he thanked you and said he really enjoyed the close look at your collection, and asked, is there a holy grail of Penn memorabilia that you are looking for? Is there anything out there that you know is out there somewhere, but you've never been able to find it?
Sean Quimby, you stumped me. I would, the answer is, I'll know it when I see it. Because I'm always surprised. There's always a surprise. And no, there isn't a holy grail that I can think of. Maybe that's my own lack of education, but nothing that comes to mind. I also have to say that in recent years, I was told at one point that I had covered the waterfront in terms of ephemera. And so a lot of my acquisitions over the last 7 to 10 years have been more in the paper realm. I mentioned Zane Grey. I did not mention that I acquired a letter that he had written to his son, Romer, I think it is. And so I did not mention a student notebook from 1840, a medical student notebook that I acquired in the last year or two. I've been moved more in those directions, more scholarly directions, I would say. So maybe that's an answer and maybe it's not. I don't know.
That's really interesting. Thank you, Susan. If I can sort of tag on to that, I was wondering if you're in conversation with collectors from other, say, Ivy League institutions who have a similar kind of project to yours, and if there's are you part of a kind of community of people doing this?
I don't know if the gentleman wants me to mention his name, but there was someone on the call who I met at an Ephemera Society show who has an extraordinary collection of broadsides. And so he and I are in touch off and on. But no, to answer your question, I'm not. And maybe that's something that I ought to work on. But no, I'm not.
Susan, Kimberly Hirschman asks, is there anything or area that you wouldn't collect?
The vast majority of things that I've acquired, I've donated to Penn Archives. There have been felts, banners. I have not gotten involved in a heavy collection of those. First of all, because I know that there are people out there that have extensive collections of those. Second, the moths that they bring are and the holes that are inevitable in a lot of them, really challenging and require, a fair amount of preservation. So I tend to avoid the felts, just because I think there's a lot of them are banners or they're pennants that are, very commonly found. People that love them, I'm sure have their ways of preserving them and preserving their collection. That's not I think that's an arena that I have avoided, but I also know that Archives has been gifted many of them. There are lots of different designs. They're fun, they're spirited, and they're great to have. I personally haven't collected those.
Thank you so much. I think we're out of time. It's 1:00 now, and I want to thank Susan for an absolutely wonderful presentation and thank Jim and John for helping to run it and make sure all the PowerPoints were together. And it was terrific. And I think it's inspired all of us to keep our eyes open. So thank you, Susan.
I would say thank you so much, Lynn, for giving me this opportunity. I really appreciate it. I would also say that if you see something and you feel that it's something that you personally want assistance with, I'm a good negotiator. And I'd be happy to help.
Great. Well, have a wonderful weekend, everybody,
Thank
and
you.
we'll see you in January for Alicia Maya talking
Thank
to
you.
us about Wanda Gog.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.